Bonjour à tous, welcome to Come in Française. Today I'm super honored and glad and thankful to have you, Julie Lapeyre from Accent Français, on this episode because we're going to talk about how to make your immersion in France yourself or with the help of a teacher. And we have a fantastic French teacher here today, Julie. So, bonjour Julie.
Bonjour.
Can you tell us a bit more about yourself for students who don't know you yet?
Sure. So my name is Julie, and I teach in Accent Français, like you just said. I'm 28 years old, and I trained a little bit in France and a little bit in England. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Fantastic. We forgot to say that Accent Français is an immersion school in Montpellier. And we've been doing some things together, you and I. And soon, I think it's 12 and 13 of July, I will be coming to your school to do a workshop like I did last year.
And, and that was amazing.
I'm so looking forward to doing it again because you girls are so nice and we had such a good time. So this is open for all the students who want to come. If you're interested and you might be in Montpellier in July, just email me and we'll let you know everything. Okay. So, Julie, my first question for you is about what do you recommend French students do when they come to France to improve their French? Because you know, and I know how overwhelming it can be to be both visiting, sometimes for the first time, and trying to improve your French. Because the French that some students learned in school was more textbook, and then they arrive in Montpellier, in Grenoble, in Paris, and then everybody speaks very fast. It's very difficult. So what are your main recommendations for students?
So the first thing I would recommend, obviously, is to speak as much French as possible because being immersed in the country, it's such a great experience and such a great way to be able to speak the language. But little tips that I would recommend, first of all, is to get an index notebook, what we call in French répertoire.
Yes.
So it's a notebook with all the letters of the alphabet, and it's a really nice way to organize the new vocabulary that you're learning. You can have just one and list all the words, or you can have several depending on the topic. That you could have one for gastronomie française, and then you can have one for like activities and everything. So that's great. And the second thing that
about the repertoire, if I may, do you recommend the students to organize the word via the English or their native language translation, or with the first letter of the French word?
I would work with just the French because that's the whole point of immersion. Just try to use your mother tongue as less as possible, which leads to my second point. Try not to use translation if possible. So I would recommend, depending on your level, drawing is always a nice way, especially for like everyday things. You can even use images, cut it out from newspapers or magazines, make it like a little DIY thing. And the other way as well is to use definitions or synonyms, for example. So that's also a really good way to not use your mother tongue and just be only using the French.
Yeah, and how did you see your students do that? How long do they stick with it? How do the best students do it? What did you see?
So usually they don't really want to start doing it because they think, oh, I have my lessons, because obviously I teach in a school, so it's organized with lessons and themes and everything. So usually they don't really want to start doing it, but once they do, they love it, because if we go back to a topic we've already talked about, they can bring their notebook and then they can be like, oh, I remember all this vocabulary, we've done this before, and they can work around it. So, for example, I have some students that use those notebooks, those répertoires, with all the other ways to say something. So, for example, if you say the word prendre, the verb prendre, then depending on the topic that I'm talking about, like what other words, what other verbs can I use? And then they have this whole list and they love it because it's just making their discussions more elaborate. Which is great.
So, for example, if they have prendre at P, you have reprendre as well in the same page. You can have se prendre la tête.
Yeah, so they can list all the expressions or they can link other verbs that they can use instead to just stop using prendre all the time, or like aller, for example, when you're doing transports, then they can see like all the different verbs that actually can be used with transports, which is amazing.
And
So,
faire, which
but
we
we
use
do
every.
use those verbs all the time anyway, being French, so it's very difficult for them.
Absolutely. And do you know any apps that do that?
That specifically do this, give
Yeah.
you other verbs? No, I don't. I know a few apps that are great to practice French, but I don't know exactly some that would give you synonyms or other ways, although you can find great websites online.
Yes.
So
And sometimes having something that's offline is very helpful.
definitely something that they can have with them. Let's say they're visiting another city, they don't need to have with them, their app that translates or to have Google. And oh God, I really do not like Google Translate. There's so many better websites, but so it's just a way for them to have something physical. And if they're talking with someone or if they're practicing or writing postcards or anything, they have this, concrete thing in their hands rather than always relying on the Wi-Fi.
Absolutely. We talked about things that can be a bit overwhelming, like writing lots of words. What about we give the audience watching now a realistic objective? For example, they could have a goal which is talk to 3 strangers every day, or do your course, buying groceries all in French, ordering at the restaurant in French. So that would be a good goal where they could just stick every day. What do you think?
Yeah, that would be great. I don't know, maybe we could say going to the Office du Tourisme and asking for an activity, like a sport activity to do, or an artistic activity, something to do, and just ask it in French and making sure that the other person is, answering back in French, because that's the problem we have in Montpellier, for example. It's a very touristy city, lots of tourists. So every time you're trying to speak in French, people will straight away just answer in English because it's easier. But that's not the point. Just be strong.
Yes, be strong. So speak French when you're here. Try to take notes of what you're learning as you go, and give yourself some funny goals that you can achieve during the day. So that's cool.
A funny goal as well, sorry to cut you off, could be talking to a stranger in the transports. So, making a compliment just to make the world a better place and speak the language. So if you're sat next to someone on the tramway or the bus, just tell them, oh, I like your shoes, or I don't know, just something. Start a conversation. Yeah.
In French, j'aime beaucoup vos chaussures.
Exactement.
Très bien. You're a teacher, so I assume you kind of tell your students maybe it's good to prepare before your trip to Paris, or Paris. I'm talking about any city in France. I live in Grenoble, so I don't even have to recommend Paris itself. Can you tell us a bit more about what you see your students do that works in terms of preparation?
Okay, so I guess we could separate students in 2 different main learning styles, because obviously there are many. We have students that are more scholar and they like the old school system. So they rely on writing and reading and just practicing all the time the language. Some students will be more learning by communicating and talking and just trying. So there's also a difference between the students that are shy and the students that are more outgoing. So those 2 styles of learning, there will be the students that write the vocabulary, they learn the vocabulary, they will practice the conjugaison, this how we learn Spanish and German and English at school, just the same way, just something that's very writing and reading. And then the other style would be people that go to activities that are organized in Montpellier, either by our school or just mainly by the city. People who will watch YouTube videos, like your videos or
about
other
this
videos.
Topic, then.
Yeah. And then just going on excursions and trying to practice the language all the time. So that would be the 2 main styles. And I guess that's also how they prepare. Yeah.
So in order to prepare, you can either work on the basics of the language, or you can focus on specific vocabulary for what you're going to do.
Exactly. So, for example, our school works by we have a theme every single week, depending on the level. So, for example, this week I'm working on finding an apartment or a colocation in Montpellier.
Yes.
And so the students, on the Monday, we give them the program so they know what they're going to be working on. So some students will look at videos online, look at the vocabulary. They know the grammar points we're going to work on, so they might want to already practice that. Some will be, what we call the tourist in the class, and they just arrive and they're like, oh, is that what we're doing? And then they will just go with the flow and practice all this vocabulary and grammar points, every single day with French people that they have met. So
sure. Yeah. So there are several ways of learning, and you can prepare depending on what you want to improve. I assume as well that depending on the age, depending on the situation, whether you're learning as a couple or a family, you could prepare differently. For example, you could do a project with your children to prepare for your trip in Montpellier or Paris or Nantes or whatever, and do something together in order to get your French ready for that.
Definitely. Well, little things can be, I always recommend everyday vocabulary more than, especially if your level is quite low, you're a beginner. Definitely starting with everyday vocabulary is great. So how about you have French breakfast in the morning?
That's so cool.
So you can buy some croissant and have some hot chocolate or coffee or something, and then just speak French, and easy things, like, can I have the butter? Do we have any jam? Voilà. Est-ce que nous avons de la confiture? All these kind of things, it's easy, and it's something that could be very playful and nice. And then bedtime stories, if you're learning with your family, that's always great.
That's cool. And if you're between grown-ups, you can watch documentaries. For example, you can always find an episode of Échappée Belle or Déraciné des ailes about the region you're going to, so you kind of get used to what you're going to see. And it's in French.
Especially with the new website now that France Télévisions has online. You can watch anything in replay, and you can add the subtitles, which is amazing. I always recommend it to my students.
Wow, yeah. I didn't know that. So, I was recommending them from YouTube because they have their channel, but it's Plus or France.tv?
I think something like that. They've changed the name recently, but I think it's France.tv. Yeah, I think that's it. And depending on the programs, you can add the subtitles. Obviously, they're only in French, but it's just a great way to listen and read at the same time. So just practice more, and it's proper immersion.
Yeah, and it's authentic material because this is what you and I watch in real life.
Yeah.
So lots of ways to prepare. We talked about the good things, but you've been teaching French for years. And what are the big mistakes that you see students do when visiting France in order to improve their French?
So for me, the biggest mistake is relying on English. Okay. And I mean in the classroom or outside the classroom. I see a lot of students with a good level in the classroom or struggling. So really, it's just across all levels. And the second they're out of the classroom, they're straight away speaking in English with other students, which is a shame because that's the moment when you get to practice everything that you have learned since, you arrived. So definitely immersion is a challenge. But speaking English the second you're outside the classroom is just taking away everything that you've learned, which is, to me, a little bit of a shame. So, and relying on translation with your mother tongue, regardless of the mother tongue, is just sad.
Well, for you, it's especially right because students are going to your school, they're paying for everything in order to improve their French. But what I saw from people who don't necessarily take classes in France is they think that passive learning is going to help them with their French. Just being in France is going to help them, but it won't. Because you're already overwhelmed with everything you want to see. So if you add to that thinking that you're going to absorb French, you won't.
Definitely. Your unconscious picks up a lot more than you're aware of,
yes,
which is obvious. But It's very important to keep practicing everything that you've been swallowing, be it in class or outside, just being in the country. So the idea is that every time you can practice, every time you can reuse, just keep going. It's a little bit like going to the gym once in the week and thinking that this is going to have an effect. It's the same. It's not. It's every day a little bit that this is going to help. Just think of your French just as if it were your body or a sport. It's every day. You just need to work on it a little.
Yes, and so if we mix in the immersion and the preparation, for example, if students who can't go to a school want to be active, for example, it could be if you're going to visit the Louvre, for example, you can prepare the vocabulary of the Louvre. And so when you take a guided tour in French, because that's even better, you can catch the words and write them down, or you already wrote them in your repertoire and you kind of know them.
For example, in Montpellier, they have something great at the Musée Fabre. You can take earphones, and every time you're in a different section, you can hear, a description, and it's like a guided tour. But you can change languages, which means that you can listen to it in French, and then if you didn't quite pick up on what's going on, you can listen to it in another language. So it's a nice way to just feel reassured, because I do understand relying on English or your native language is a way to feel reassured and making sure that you're picking up everything that's being said to you, because obviously that's one of the biggest fears. Someone talked to me and I'm not quite sure what they said. But if you have that way of changing languages, it's just a great way to feel reassured and just keep on learning.
Yeah, turning on the guide, audio guide in the local language is always a good way to practice, because you have the painting or the statue in front of you and you have this description in French. And even in English, you won't remember everything because it's so many facts. And why not try and pick up a few words in French instead?
Very true.
I can't do that in many languages, but I'm sure English and Spanish are okay now.
It would work out, yeah.
So you and I are going to meet in July in Montpellier. I'm going to meet some of your students. But honestly, as you know, lots of students of French cannot visit France because it's expensive or they can't for many, many reasons. What if someone can visit France, or a Francophone country? Obviously, it can be Switzerland, it can be Belgium, countries in Africa or Quebec, but they want an immersion. What can students do instead?
So first thing would be to use this amazing tool that we now have, which is the internet. So I would recommend watching videos and films online. Now I know that on Netflix, in most countries, you can watch French movies with French subtitles or English subtitles, and sometimes you can even find American movies or whatever in French they're dubbed, so it's not amazing. But if you do want to practice, it's still something. Obviously, there are YouTube channels like yours, but there are other YouTube channels that I really like Alex Viseo. He does those amazing videos in French about traveling. So if you're planning to travel somewhere, you can have a look at what he's saying in French and all the things to do in those different countries. So that's a great way to practice as well.
Yeah, that's so good. I never thought about that. Instead of looking for information in your native language, you can look for information about the same topic, but in French.
Yeah, blogs, videos, so many things. You could even order a book on Amazon in French about this country. So, it's just a great way to keep learning.
That's a good thing. And for an immersion itself, what I was thinking about is students who want to do it could do it for a week or 3 days, like a weekend in France. For 2 days, you only speak French, even if it's to your cat, and watch videos in French and speak French, and all your information has to be in French. That could be pretty fun.
Well, there are so many things. We were saying about French breakfast with your family, but with your friends, you can have French dates. So you could go to a cafe and you're only allowed to speak French, or you could go to the restaurant and drink red wine, and just speak French. And I think coffee dates are always really fun because they're short. If you're organizing a whole day or a whole weekend, it might be just a little bit overwhelming and just too much French. But doing a couple of hours is just a great way to keep practicing all the time. And also social networks, it's always great. So, I mean, now you can follow people from anywhere around the world. So it's very easy to find, popular or less popular people on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook. And then you can read their updates and see what they're up to. Especially with, on Snapchat or Instagram stories, you can actually have videos and see them speaking the language. It's just great.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So having more sources of French and non-teaching ones, I would say.
Yeah, try to just immerse yourself not only in like the language French, but also in the culture. What's going on in France? I could have a look at local newspapers, for example. Here in Montpellier, we have the Midi Libre online, yes. And you can have a look at what's going on in Montpellier. What are people talking about? What's happening here? Is there any festivals? Is there anything happening in the center? What's going on during the summer? So it's just a great way to keep learning French, but also improve your cultural knowledge of France.
Absolutely. And it anchors you into a city. So whether you're going to visit or you just like it, you could kind of fake being there. And also the local news are very easy to relate to compared to bigger news. For example, if you read Le Monde, the news are going to be the same as you would have in other newspapers in the international section. And then the French news, they're pretty much the same everywhere. If you're reading local news, you will have, as you said, the festivals, the school things, what's happening. Here we have Le Dauphiné. You can just pick a city and find a newspaper that fits.
Definitely. And now online you can find pretty much anything. So it's just great.
So you could do your 2 hours of French cafe thinking you're in a city itself.
Yeah. You could, definitely. You could have themes. You can have like French nights and organize some dinner and just speak French. So many different things. And also think about, so we said about reading, newspaper, etc. But if you're learning as a family, obviously bedtime stories in French, and also all the Deepenings that are set in France. So many things.
Yes. And what I was thinking as well is, when you do something very real, such as a coffee or dinner, you find out what's missing from your vocabulary. Because usually when you and I are going to meet for lunch in July, we're not going to talk about international news or philosophy. We're going to talk about what's going on and what do you think about the menu, what do you think about the wine. So if you're missing this everyday vocabulary, you will see it so you can improve for next time.
Definitely. I was realizing this morning during one of the lessons I was doing, we were just revising places in town, and I was just asking my students, what activity can I do there? So they were supposed to say, je peux utiliser, je peux ouvrir, je peux prendre, etc. And I realized that it didn't have this vocabulary, this everyday thing. And they've been living in France for, a month or 2 months, and they didn't know how to say, open a bank account or look at the menu and order. It's crazy. So we had to go through this. And it's when you are practicing this everyday vocabulary in an everyday kind of context that you realize the things that you're missing.
Yes. So even if you can't go to France or any other Francophone country, you can still have the benefit of an immersion if you really want it. So there are lots of things you can do even if you can't visit us.
Definitely.
So I have one last question. So thank you very much for being here. I don't want to take too much of your time. You teach French at Accent Français in Montpellier, which I recommend because I've been there. What tips or recommendations do you have when students want to learn with a teacher of a school, whether in France or abroad? What's important to check? I'm not saying, everybody should go to Accent Français because that doesn't make any sense. But how do you recommend people look for a teacher or a school that would fit them? What's important?
Well, I think the most important thing really is the teaching style. In Accent Français, we are using a very playful way. It's very, very modern. So we use games and we use videos, etc. And we try to rely less and less on photocopies and more on just online material and communication between students. Not all students are comfortable with this. So make sure that you have an idea what the teaching style is in the school or with the teacher that you're interested in, and make sure it fits you and it fits with the way that you want to learn the language. My second tip would be to not have too many expectations regarding you or your teacher or your school. Just trust your school, trust your teacher, and trust yourself. Just don't overestimate or underestimate. If you go to a school like Accent Français, you will have a test when you arrive, and your teachers will just make sure to put you in the right level, and you will be able to go up or down depending on how you're feeling. But just make sure that you're trusting the school because we know what we're doing.
Yeah, I always recommend my students who can get a real teacher, a human one, to go and find one, because that's how you improve very fast, and that fits your level. And the teacher will be able, as you said, to tell you, this is important, that it's important for you to fix that. This doesn't matter. This is now the time for you to study. But if you study on your own, you just think, okay, the subjunctive is extremely important, and no one cares.
And also the thing is, the teacher will be able from the outside to see where you're struggling and probably understand the mechanism behind it and be able to just help you. So you can just pass this hurdle and it's less difficult. Whereas when you're studying by yourself, you might just be really stuck on something and just don't know how to pass it. So definitely having the teacher is great for this. And your teacher will be able to say, well, you're struggling with this. You have the possibility to practice this or do that. Maybe watch this video. How about you read this article and we talk about it? So it will be someone, pushing you and helping you out with the things you're struggling with.
Yeah, and sometimes I do that with my students. I tell them, on this topic, your French is good enough. You will struggle a lot to just get a little bit better, but now it's time to move on and work on this, which will really open new doors for you.
Definitely. And also sometimes we have students who are really focused on something and they really want to be good at it. And I say to them, with the level you're at, you don't actually need this. Can we just work on something that's pretty important and you can use? So yeah, it's just nice to have someone, outside of your brain telling you what you should really be working on.
Yeah. So thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you in July. I didn't say that yet, but if you watch the video so far, you get 10% off Accent Français if you say you're coming from Commune Française. That's pretty cool. Thank you for my audience. So we'll meet in July. And in the meanwhile, if you have any question, you can ask them in the comment section below. What could we tell the audience to do as a challenge?
As a challenge? Well, if you are in France, definitely go out there and speak, because if you're not making mistakes, you have no way to improve. It's when you make mistakes that you know what's wrong, and then you can work on it. And then if you're at home, how about you organize a really nice French dinner, some steak and some red wine, maybe not the snails, but
No.
And just speak in French.
Yeah, it could be even just for the apéro and 30 minutes. That's good enough.
Definitely.
And with the wine, you will speak French much better than you thought you could.
Oh, yeah. Wine or Kir Royal. It's very French, too.
Definitely. So thank you very much, Julie. Thank you for Accent Français, who gave some time, who allowed you to get here for the Commune Française community. Yeah. So everybody who's watching, if you want more, you can go and look at the Accent Français website. You can also get the 10-day everyday French crash course on communefrancaise.com. It's free. If you want more videos like this with Julie and other people, you can subscribe to the channel. It's free and we have new videos every Tuesday. Merci beaucoup, Julie.
Merci beaucoup, Géraldine.
À bientôt.
À bientôt, au revoir.
Salut.